The directed mind essentially is that layer in between that, helps you execute and ideally helps you get into a flow state. In terms of how to make the right decision is make a decision. You will know whether it's the right one sooner or later. There would be definitely 3 moments throughout the race where I'll be willing to throw in the towel and stop. When that moment arrives, you need to have some form of preparation to know how am I going to deal with those thoughts. In those moments when I have the feeling I'm not able to continue, I just remember I have done it a million times in training.
It's almost putting things at knowing that your mind at times is going to struggle.
Yeah.
But ways of bringing it back, ways of creating focus in a different way.
Yes.
Of shifting your thinking and being intentional about what you're thinking about. Ever feel like you're putting in the hours, hustling hard, but not seeing the needle move on your biggest goals, whether it's in training, business, or just life in general? Welcome to the Upward Spiral podcast that cuts through the noise to bring you actionable strategies for creating real momentum and lasting positive change. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with someone who embodies the principle of directed energy in everything he does. Before I reveal his name, consider this. He's not just somebody who understands peak performance, he lives it. Having conquered one of the world's biggest and toughest endurance challenges, not once, but 3 times, he's taken the same laser focus and built a multi-million-dollar company that's recognized as the best in its field, right here in Singapore and beyond. And he has an incredible clarity and insightful perspective that shines through in everything he does. Please now welcome the CEO and co-founder of Athleaders, the brilliant Bernhard Lieder. Bernhard, so good to see you again.
It's great to catch up. Yeah, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I was waiting who else is going to enter the studio, but then, actually, you're talking about me. So yeah, it's very, very sweet of you. Thank you so much.
So today we're going to talk about why am I not getting results and talk about the power of the directed mind. So maybe let's start with something that many of our listeners, and myself included, are grappling with. And that is, I feel like I've got the right mindset, however you want to define that. And I'm very motivated, but I feel constantly busy. Everything I'm doing maybe is a little bit fragmented and it's not necessarily effective. In your experience, what is going on there?
Oh, that's a big question. So let's try to break it down into a couple of smaller pieces. I think the first thing is, and that is a quite straightforward one, but actually in terms of implementation, not so much, is what is it that you're after, right? So being very clear about what is it that you want in the first place. And then making sure that, you cut out actually a lot of the noise, a lot of the clutter outside. I think the media is not really there to inform. It is there to entertain, at all levels. And I think it's very, very easy to be, in this constant, entertainment spiral where, you have a lot of content that comes your way, but your brain has to somehow process that. So I think it's consciously, without, wanting to go down any kind of scientific route, I think at a very high level, it's really cutting out, a lot of the noise that is happening outside and really staying focused. I was listening to a person that is very well considered in Dubai in the investment community. And he was basically saying, if you don't have, multiple businesses running at the same time, you're doing something wrong. In my opinion, that is actually setting people up for failure because you constantly have the feeling, I should be further ahead. I should have already done something more. If I have just built one business, that is not enough. Rather than focus on many small things, just, become excellent in one small field, right? And we spoke about the topic of health and fitness, about, me training you at that point. At that time, I was not really doing, many other things, right? I mean, if you've had designed a t-shirt for me at that time, it would be, sleep, eat, train, repeat, right? That's what it was. So at that time, you really immerse yourself and you go down that rabbit hole and you just, you're fueled by that deep passion that that you don't actually want to do many other things. And it might seem like very, very narrow to other people, but, that is actually something where, after some time you realize, wow, yeah, now I have that time for that deep focus. I've immersed myself. I'm not going into, all sorts of different directions. You spoke about, the postnatal training that we're doing. But, when you looked at my profile in itself, was I able to stretch myself towards postnatal training? Yes. Was that my core? No, it was not. I'm a male trainer who has never and will never give birth, right?
Yeah.
So everything that I learned in that space was, through, formal learning, through, application. But it was not something where I was authentic in. So I think understanding there, what is the field that you are authentic in, and not trying to be, anything and everything to everyone. I think those are points that really help over time and, actually give you time back, because you can eliminate the things you don't have to do.
Yeah. Well, that if you want to do it all. Now, and I think I'm kind of my own worst enemy at this point, but I want to be good at all of these areas. Like, I've got the right mindset, I work hard, but sometimes I just feel like I'm scrambling in this kind of sea of like busyness. How? What's the mindset shift that I need to make?
I think the progress in those areas is not linear, right? In every single one of those areas, as long as you're putting a considerable amount of focus, you will be able to, get to that level, or will be able to maintain it, right? At certain phases, it is okay to maintain. It doesn't have to be that you are, improving at all the time. So I think, the point that, that at least helped me is looking at it more, rather than having a fixed mindset and trying to optimize all of those areas, or rather having a directed mindset where you basically say, well, there's certain things that I have to prioritize at this point. It doesn't mean that I don't value them, right? So when I was in my corporate job, one of the people that mentored me, she told me, well, I would love to be there with my daughter, right? So she was a very senior person in the organization. It's like, I'd love to be there, with my daughter when, she has, her performances, attends certain exhibitions, but it is not realistic. It is not something that I can do at this point, rather than, being there and having a self-made cake. I basically give her a certain amount and say, okay, please also buy the tissues. And I have to accept that that is the best that I can do at this time. Do I think I can do better? Yes. But that is the decision that I have to take at this moment, because I know it is something that will pay off for the entire family at a later stage. So I think, having to make those kind of decisions and, basically saying, well, at this moment, I direct my mind to be focused on whatever I need to be focused on. But when I go back to, something else, I am fully present over there. I'm not thinking about anything else. So I think balancing those ones out is possible, as long as, you somehow box them and say, okay, when I'm in my podcast, I'm fully present with my guests, right? I'm not worrying about, okay, how's my child now doing? What is it that she's going through? She told me that, she had a tough day, in, nursery yesterday. You're fully present, but, as soon as that is over, you basically allow yourself a little bit of time to switch. And for different people, that's different things, right? Some people need to be alone in order to calm down a little bit. Other people, they actually draw that energy from other people. So it's about finding out what is it that works for you there. For myself, I need some quiet time in between, right? I can speak to people the entire day, but at some point, I just need some time for myself to, process certain things, to, just have a little bit of time for myself. So that's something that works for me there.
Yeah, I find that. Okay. So I've got my pillars, and really it's probably not having a goal that's running concurrently, a big goal that's running concurrently with each of them.
Yeah.
So it's just knowing that, sometimes like the family life needs to dial down whilst I'm marathon training.
Yeah.
When I'm not marathon training and I'm just going to kind of an everyday training routine, that's where I can maybe ramp things up for work.
Correct.
So it's actually trying to kind of just dial things up and down so I can still remain focused.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And knowing what is it that you consider actually a good level? What is it that you consider something that is a success in each area, without being too influenced by, everything that, people tell you around you, and, where they try to influence you in terms of, well, this is how it should look like. Well, who says that it is, right? Ultimately, you are your own judge there. Yeah. I think that's important to keep that in mind as well.
I think also, these things, they get easier when you get systems in place.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, let's take the podcast, for example. This was about a year ago when I was starting out. It was very difficult. I was doing everything manually. Now I've got a team. I've got systems in place. I know at what point I'm leveraging AI, and therefore something that was very time consuming and difficult back then is now starting to feel a little bit easier.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that's something that applies. Is very wise. That applies in every area. Actually making certain systems processes work for you, that takes out a lot of the guesswork.
So tell me, what is a directed mind?
Directed mind is basically being in a state where you're fully present, you're fully focused. It's some people would refer to it as, let's say, a deep state, but I would rather look at it at a slightly higher level, a meta level, where you have a clear understanding of the direction that you are headed towards. You have cleared out the noise. You have said no to certain things that don't serve the goals that you have, and you're working towards and making your mind work towards those kind of things. So and for different people, depending on the industry they're in, the field that they're in, that might look very, very different. But yeah, that's essentially what it comes down to.
Is it similar to a flow state, or is that more kind of the result of having a directed mind?
I would say the flow state is at a micro level.
Mm-hmm.
The directed mind is at a meso level, right? So somewhere in between. And then you would have the macro level where, you basically look at your goals overall, etc. So the directed mind essentially is that layer in between that, helps you execute and ideally helps you get into a flow state around 3 times a day, ideally for roughly a period of 90 minutes, because that's proven to be the time where the brain is actually able to fully focus, and, afterwards you can tell that the cognitive performance really dips.
Look, you've seen in both the athletic and the business worlds, how does having a directed mind allow individuals to cut through the noise and prioritize what truly moves the needle?
I find it easiest talking about certain specific examples. So let me maybe give you an example of both.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before I did my first half Ironman in Dubai, right, I knew that I had to travel for that. I'd never traveled with so much equipment before. I'd never done that kind of a distance before. And I knew that the climate conditions were different as well, right? So I trained in Singapore, but at that time I raced in Dubai. The most important point from a directed mind point of view was to basically collect certain key thoughts throughout the training stage, because I knew for that long of a distance, there would be definitely 3 moments throughout the race where I'll be willing to throw in the towel and stop. All right. That's the only thing you want to do at that point. So when that moment arrives, you need to have some form of preparation to know, how am I going to deal with those thoughts, right? What is it that I'm going to direct those thoughts towards, right? Because I know that they will come up. So what I did is I basically, created a 1-pager. It doesn't have to be a 1-pager. It can just be a couple of notes jotted down on your phone, right? But it should be something that, you hold precious. It is not something, it's not a junkyard for, Tony Robbins quotes, right? Just put it black and white. I love Tony Robbins and I love his quotes, but, it can be a little overdone, right? Yeah. So what I basically did throughout my training stage, whenever I, hit a moment where I found that, it was difficult, I tried to relate that to another area in my life where actually things were going quite okay. All right. So the idea was not to drown out negativity, but it was basically say, all right, let me put it into perspective. Right. So one of the thoughts was, pain is physical, suffering is emotional. And I basically kept repeating that over and over again, because I realized at that moment, my mind did not want to continue. But, my heart rate was telling me, I'm still able to continue. All the training that I had put in was telling me I was still able to continue. So I was basically collecting those ideas, those thoughts that would serve me at different stages of the Ironman. One of the things that I struggled really with when I started triathlon was the swim part, because I almost drowned as a child. Wow. Right, so it was at a swimming pool with my mom, and somehow a stranger, struck up a conversation with her, and it was one of those pools that is sliding, right? So, and I just, like an idiot, just kept walking, down further and further and further, until I was swallowing a lot of water, and then at some point my mom pulled me out, But that caused me throughout my childhood to actually have nightmares whenever it was about the topic of water drowning, right? So in all my nightmares, I was actually close to drowning. So you take that and you say, let's do an open water swim where you look down, it is pitch black, you don't see anything, right? So that actually was the first barrier. And, that was the first time that I actually came across that concept, not consciously, but it was something that I experienced, right? Where I basically, kept writing down ideas as, okay, what is it that I'm going to replace that with, right? What are better thoughts in that moment? Yeah. And through that swim part, and in a way, triathlon helped me actually deal with certain things that, I was not able to get a good grasp on just because, the physicality of the event allowed me to deal with those things in a different way. Bringing it back to, how you're using the directed mind, basically taking those ideas, plugging them in and saying, in those moments when I have the feeling I'm not able to continue, I just remember I have done it a million times in training. I remember those quotes that I have plugged into my mind, and I direct my mind in that direction because it is something that is more positive. That's how I, really experienced it from a sports kind of setting. And, then it was like, oh, wow, if that's something that works in that field, that means so much to me already. It should work on the other side as well. It should work on the professional side as well. And I think that then opened up an entire, other can of worms. And I basically went down that route as well.
This, for me, I think what I was like misunderstanding at the beginning was maybe like the directed mind was, setting out clear goals and then being really focused and executing against it. But I think it's so much more than that. It's almost putting things that knowing that your mind at times is going to struggle, but ways of bringing it back, ways of creating focus in a different way, of shifting your thinking and being intentional about what you're thinking about.
Correct. So that's why it's one level up from the flow state, right? It allows you to then go back into a flow state because you have directed yourself in that direction of being like fully present, and then afterwards everything falls into place.
Yeah, exactly. I think I love that, and I often when I'm running a marathon, it's you know you're going to hit that wall.
Yes.
It's going to come, and it's like for me, I actually have a playlist called The Wall, and it's like as soon as I know I'm going to hit that, that playlist goes on. I save like my favorite flavor gummies for like when I'm going to hit the wall.
Okay. What's on that playlist?
Oh God, just actually a lot of like 80s ballads and
80s ballads. Okay.
Yeah, it's things like Michael Jackson's Bad. It's things that are going to really just upbeat that I want to sing along. And sometimes
you actually do sing along?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I actually sometimes will take my headphones out and will have the music play like just straight out of my phone when I'm like running a race.
Like a 14-year-old.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, on a bike.
But it actually really helps other people around you then, because it's normally kind of that 30 to 40 mark where everybody's struggling. And if all of a sudden you've kind of got Queen blaring out, and I remember kind of running Singapore Marathon, I had Queen, Another One Bites the Dust, which was just really funny because I was like running past people going, Another One Bites the Dust. Yeah. But those are things in place, but I never really thought about my mind, like what can I tell my mind? Okay, yes, I've done it before in training, but here are the quotes, here's maybe the reassurance. When your brain is saying you can't do this anymore, what's your response?
Yes.
I think putting that in place is really smart.
I feel it's a slightly different way of actually getting energy that is from a place that is slightly deeper, right? So for me, the music strategy, it's not a bad one. I think it's a good one, and it works. It's basically like coffee, right?
Yeah.
It gives you an additional burst of energy. But it's a physical one, right? Yeah. It's a very, physical kind of reaction, while, actually working, with your mind is a very brainy, very cognitive approach. So I think, having that combination is actually something that works quite well. And you might even encounter that at different stages of, we're still talking about sports at, different stages of your race. you'll be able to plug in different things. So
it's awesome. And can you give me an example of in business as well, the directive mind in business?
I was in the corporate world for roughly 10 years, right? So in my family, everybody was employed except for one person. And that person, whenever I met him, it was, fun to spend half a day with. But then, usually around the lunch mark, the focus started to drift. And I could not hold a proper conversation with him at that time because he was he had mentally gone back to work, right? So in my mind, somebody that is running a business and, he had a team of roughly 10 people, right? He was not physically present. In my mind, it was, if you have your own business, you're essentially working all the time, right? So in my mind, that was something that I had excluded for a very long time. Now enter those, long distance events, triathlons, being able to, conquer certain fears. And I felt that somehow something was missing, right? I felt that, the role that I had was a very, very clear box. It was a fun role, and a lot of people would have loved to actually have it. And traveling around, you're meeting interesting people, you're working on projects that you see. One of the projects that we worked on that time was all the materials that go into your Dyson hairdryer, right? So I mean that is cool, fancy new stuff. But for somebody that has always been passionate about sports, that really did not fulfill me, right? So basically consciously managing that shift and untangling yourself from, all the, coaching sessions that the corporate has given you, right? All the trainings that they have poured into you, where you feel somehow an obligation that, well, I should pay that back, right? So it actually took me a very long time, took me almost 2 years to actually untangle myself from that and say, I've contributed in many different ways to that company. I will always be grateful for everything that organization has done for me in terms of my development, and I cherish that. But I'm on a different path, right? I cannot make my future dependent on things that have happened over the last 10 years plus minus, right? And basically, at that time, I actually started to look into what are the things that would actually give me joy, right? And whenever I felt those moments, in my regular day-to-day job that, just made me tired, right? You're sitting through a 2.5-hour meeting and there's only one person that is talking. You have ideas to contribute, but actually they don't matter because, you're two levels below, right? What do you do in that moment, right? So you just walk out and, you're completely drained and say, well, I could spend my time differently. But in that moment, because you're constantly also fighting with this, urge is like, well, if I would have a chance, I would be able to do it differently. Maybe I just wait for another 3 months, then I'd be able to meet person X, Y. Long story short, what it did is it helped me deal with those situations and basically put those situations apart and say, whenever I encounter those kind of situations, this is what I will replace it with. Why? Because I need to be in a space where after work, I actually have time to think about what is it that I should rather do. So rather than directing my energy, my emotions towards the stuff that I don't want, I should actually direct it towards the stuff that I want, right? One of the things that my guest father in the US told me was, I'm not going to tell you at that stage, I'm not going to tell you whether, leaving the company or going into or staying, whether that's the right or the wrong decision. Just make sure you're not running away from it. Just make sure you're running towards something. So by actually taking that energy and saying, well, I know that that's happening. The 2.5 hours are not pleasant. I don't enjoy that. But I have to get through that in order to figure out what is it that I'm going to run towards. So rather than running away from something, I want to run towards something. And I think that process, it took me 2 years, and that's where the thoughts, those experiences from sports really, really helped. Because in many ways, you have similar kind of thoughts, right? You sit in a meeting and you're like, okay, I actually just want to get up and walk out of the door, right? You may be able to do it, but there are certain kind of consequences. So how do you basically control your mind in that moment? What are the kind of thoughts that you're replacing it with? I think that would be an example, more from a corporate context.
Yeah. But eventually you made the shift, right?
I did.
Eventually you did walk out the door.
Yeah.
So there must have been some thinking in there that was like, you know what, why am I doing this? And I want to follow something else. Tell us a little bit about the path.
The path was an interesting one, was a very fulfilling one, because you basically go from a position where a lot of stuff is taken care of to a moment where you are CEO and janitor at the same time. There's an IT issue. It's your responsibility. There's a client who's unhappy. It's your responsibility. There's no client that is on the door. It's your responsibility, right? So I think that transition, as much as I had prepared it, it was something that once you are at that stage, it is something where you need that conviction once again. I don't tell that story often, but the first month after I stepped out, with everything that we had lined up in terms of the corporate gigs, the initial thought was to actually go down and work with corporates on how to apply the concepts of sports, similar to what I just described, apply the concepts of sports and help folks in the corporate world actually implement them. But it was right before COVID. So we had lined up all of those gigs, and then almost the day that I stepped out, the first kind of, trickle down effect from COVID hit, and budgets were getting frozen left, right, and center. Revenue in the first month, was $70 $70. So you look at your bank account, you're like, all right, did I take the right decision, right? I said that I would line all of those things up. Did I really do my job? And you have, all of those questions that, you suddenly ask yourself. There's nobody else, right? So in a team setting, when I played football, I could always say, it's because that guy showed up, half drunk, to the meeting point. And, because of that, it was a draw at the end. When I was doing my triathlons, there was nobody else, right? So it's the same thing over there. You basically go from a setting where you're working in a team. Suddenly it's only, yourself. And, I'm very lucky that my wife actually, did a fantastic job. I always say that she's in many ways the brain behind the business, and, she's the one that really guides it. So yeah, she was really supportive, and she said, well, you've been training clients for years. This is something that, you've actually been doing on the side all the time. People come to you and want your advice. But, you were, somehow caught in your intellectual bubble, and you say, because I have a degree, I'm not able to do that. Why don't you do it? Now is the time. Enjoy it. So I went down that route, and, actually ever since then, yeah, I've never looked back. So it is something where, I feel that that start, often people talk about pivoting. Pivoting is a very fancy term for saying, do what works, right? And essentially that's what happened. There was no conscious kind of, we have to make that work. You look at, okay, what are the things that are working at this point? The work that we had cut out for ourselves that was not working. So we pivoted towards something else. And it actually was the thing that, I had done for many, many years, where I was, already, thorough, where I knew my stuff, and where people immediately could recognize, that's the right person. That's the person I want to work with. And everything then from there, developed. Within 3 months, we had a double-digit wait list. I worked with you for 3 months, and, when you told me, hey, listen, I'm going to transition into something else, the next day, there was a person that say, hey, listen, do you have that spot available, right? Yeah. So, and then it, came to a level where, I was not able to run those sessions myself anymore, right? So, I was running in a convenience-based model, going to people. I was doing 50 plus sessions a week, right? And I'd say, well, that's not a lot, but you have to factor in, there's travel, right? There's preparation of sessions, unless, you just go there and say, you know what, I'm going to wing it, right?
Yeah.
Which is not my style, which is not the style of the team that we're having right now. You do the proper follow-up, right? You write down what were the things that were actually done. You send that across to the client so they have a reference for that. If they want to have something in between their sessions, if they have questions, right? You attend to that. So that is something, all of that came on top. So it was an intense phase, but it was a very fun phase. So then we decided, okay, it's time to hire the first person, the second person, and everything else is history.
Do you think your early career as a professional footballer molded this directed mind?
Oh, 100%. One of my coaches always used to say, football is professional, is behavior on a pitch. Football is social behavior on a pitch, right? So, and that's true. If you're punctual, in sports, if you do your stuff for your team members on a football pitch, you will typically do that in other areas of your life as well. So there's a lot of principles that I picked up over there. When I was 13, I asked my parents for ankle weights as a present, right? Which, in hindsight, they were like, well, that's not really something that a 13-year-old should work with. I was like, well, I looked it up and it is something that works. So it's there's a lot of things that I picked up from those times, and I think I still apply them to these days. In a lot of cases, I most likely don't even notice them.
Yeah, one of my friends, he used to play for Sheffield Wednesday, and I've just never known anyone like him in the sense of his rigor. He'll put that plan together for training, and he's big in the high rock scene now, but the level of focus and rigidity, it's actually amazing. I've never known anyone eat like he eats. I've never known anyone protect his sleep like he sleeps. He's in bed at 7:30 every night. He's up at 5. I think I'm pretty solid when it comes to sticking to my training, but this guy's next level. And a lot of the time I kind of think and I wonder if it was that training that he had when he was younger, that, being a professional footballer, and, he's just wired differently.
Yeah. I think, as you mentioned, the habits and the strategy, the processes earlier, it comes down to that. I always say the difference between an amateur and a professional athlete is that the professional athlete spends more time on recovery. That's the only real difference, because in terms of training protocols, you can do the same thing as a professional. You can work with the same coaches. By now, these days, you have a lot of, free stuff that is available. It is not a secret anymore. There's a lot of, drills that are available that you can look up. So from a training point of view, that is not a secret. The nutrition part is something that is widely available. If you want to have a nutrition coach, a dietitian, you'll be able to get that, right? But the main difference is really the professional spends more time on the recovery, and that's active and passive recovery. So active recovery is really, doing your foam rolling, doing your massage gun, your infrared, etc. But the passive recovery really is, anything that is sleep related, right? So that is, and with a full-time job, you will not be able to get to that level. That over time compounding will make the difference.
The word I was looking for before was discipline. I've never known anyone with his level of discipline. I just, with the diet, cannot sustain it for just a very long period of time of eating rice, chicken and broccoli. I cannot have it for every single meal. Yes. But one thing that's really struck me from the conversation of the different pillars that we've talked about in your own life, be it kind of triathlons, business, the corporate, everything, is you've almost been quite analytical. You've been able to kind of reflect on what you're doing. And I believe kind of looking at as much data as kind of is available before you make the decision, in order to then, know where to focus and to cut out all of the noise. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, when I was in my early corporate days, I was not a very analytical person at that time. It was my first manager that actually said, well, I love what you're doing. And, I can tell that you're on a good path, but, you need to be a commercial manager. You need to be a business analyst. You need to be able to understand data. So, and that actually turned out to be my next role. So, and from that time onwards, I'm not the most analytical person in the room, definitely not, but I was able to stretch myself in that direction. So I think that's one. 2, these days, I think as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you have a vast advantage. You have artificial intelligence available. So if you want to test an idea, you're able to actually get a lot more response. You're actually able to get a lot more data right away, and you don't have to go out and, try and test and fail, which, comes with different advantages, disadvantages, right? Having that response over time from the market, you get certain cuts and bruises in the field that, will help you later on. If it is too easy at the beginning, you might, easily then jump to something else. So, but I think in terms of the, data, in terms of the technology that is available, that is something that has to drive decisions, whether it is, within the company in terms of, how you're doing your day to day, but also in terms of, any kind of future, fields that you're looking into from an expansion point of view, etc.
Do you have any advice on like how you make the right decision, and know where to focus? Like, how do you cut out the noise?
I think the best advice in terms of how to make the right decision is make a decision. You will know whether it's the right one sooner or later. But not making a decision actually is the part that delays things, and that's what you don't want. You will not always make the right decision. There's a ton of things that I can tell you, over the last couple of years that we have done from a business point of view, that with the knowledge that we have today, we will do differently. But with the available information we had at that time, that's what it is. So rather than worrying about do I make the right decision or not, rather go ahead, make the decision. If it turns out to be the wrong one, you'll be able to fix it, right? Yeah. There's certain things you can't fix, and that is usually something that is people related. So once a relationship, once something, whether it's at work or private, once that is impacted, that is something that is very difficult to fix. So I think there it's important to understand what are the kind of decisions where I can go ahead and take those ones quite easily, and which are the areas that I really have to protect.
Oh, I love that. And such great advice as well, because I think everything that we've spoken about before, it's almost like make a decision, set a plan, get your head down, focus on what needs to be done. But you're also saying, at some point you've got to look at what you're doing and go, okay, actually, if this isn't working, let's pivot. And you demonstrated that with COVID and your time then. So even though kind of a directed mind feels like a professional footballer's level of focus, it's not without, it's not so rigid that you've kind of got that, the sunk cost fallacy. You're not sticking to something if it's not working just because you've been focused in that area.
The two examples that made the most amount of sense for myself, and that usually resonate well with the corporates, where I deliver talks, are Serena Williams and Tiger Woods. Both of them at the height of their career changed their swing, changed part of their game. So Tiger Woods changed his swing. Serena Williams changed the way she was serving and returning. So if athletes at that top level, right, they were both number one already, if they are able to go through that process and say, well, there are certain things that don't work for me anymore and I have to tweak it because otherwise, I will not be able to sustain that. What is holding us back from actually taking the next step?
I think we've spoken a lot about kind of cultivating focus and self-resilience. I think you were just giving some amazing examples there, and applying the directed mind in business. Like, how can we structure to peak performance? So earlier you talked about kind of the 3 90-minute rule for focused impact. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how to put it into practice?
Yeah, I think these days you have a lot of peak performance coaches. You have people that that you Google peak, and I think you get more results than for water. It's at some point I actually did the research in terms of you just plug in peak performance, and everything these days is peak performance, from tires to people, right? Where does it start? And I think there's a lot of confusion these days. I feel that it has become a very rigid and a very narrow space, right? Unless you're getting up at 5 a.m., you're doing your ice bath, right? You're immediately going for your workout. You're then afterwards spending time meditating, journaling down your thoughts. You're going into work, and you're very, very, very mindful about what you're eating for your breakfast. And the day continues like that. Unless you're leading that life, you're not peak performance. And I find that makes it very, very unattainable for the masses. And I relate that to the field of fitness, where a lot of people now jump into that and say, well, if you're not doing that, you're not doing it right. Look at the statistics. Look at Singapore. Look at the obesity statistics for kids. There's a vast majority of younger folks and adults who are not participating in that space at all, right? Yeah. And I'm talking about getting the bare amount of steps in, eating nutritious meals, and that is a developed economy, right? Look at the Middle East, right? 50% plus of the Middle East, is obese. So rather than looking at from a peak performance point of view, how can I, optimize that? That is something that applies to, certain folks that are in that space. I'm not denying that, right? As a CEO, as, a professional athlete, I want to be in that space. However, the broad masses, it is important that they develop certain kind of protocols that actually help them. And what I found is, as in many cases, you have to say no to certain things, right? And one of the things that I found when I actually looked at how athletes are structuring their days, there's that rule of 3 times 90 minutes. And 3 times 90 minutes is essentially the time that a professional athlete practices every single day. 3 times 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Whenever I asked that question to audiences, they would tell me, a professional athlete definitely practices 8 hours a day, 9 hours, 12 hours, the highest, I think, was 16 hours. So it is 4.5 hours. And yes, they will have certain days where they, practice a little bit more, but you look at it, on average, and it will be 3 times 90 minutes. And that is because they have found that they're able to hold focus and they're able to maximize a practice if they, have it really as a deliberate event where they're spending a maximum of 90 minutes. As soon as that is over, they basically focus on recovery, they focus on their nutrition, etc., which is something that supports it. But the activity in itself, the deliberate practice, is where they're fully present and they know that this is the only thing that they're optimizing. That is done for a maximum of 3 times 90 minutes. So translating that over to somebody that is in a corporate job, how do you do that? Typically also over there, you would have your KPIs, right? You have your job description. You know very clearly what are the things that you're measured by. You would basically structure your day by saying, what are the key activities? What are the kind of 90-minute windows that I need to have in order to make headwind on certain topics? And if I have those ones consistently, I will naturally, outperform the rest, because most people don't have that. They come into the office and the first thing is, let me check my emails. That is not a 90-minute activity. That is something that follows afterwards. Yes, you have to be aware of what is happening around you, and there's a certain kind of response rate that is required. But your 90 minutes, those are the ones that you really want to focus on, right? So if you're in sales and you want to close a deal and you have to follow up with that client, you need to go back and forth with that person. That is your 90 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in marketing and you want to strategize and you say, well, what is the kind of budget that we will allocate to different Southeast Asian countries? And I need to look at the data. You set those 90 minutes aside and you make sure that you're uninterrupted at that time. Mm-hmm. It's not that a professional athlete, practices during their 90 minutes and somebody comes in and say, okay, can we do a media thing right now? That's not how it works. That is waiting for later, right? So utilizing those 3 times 90 minutes and being very mindful in terms of what is it that I want to make headwind on, and that can be different things in your life as well. I just used the example of, let's say, a corporate role.
Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating, because I'm actually a bit of a nerd when it comes to productivity hacks. Mm-hmm. Or I'm always kind of calendar blocking and trying different techniques, but I didn't know that about athletes, that was kind of the 90 minutes that they can hold their focus for. And of course that kind of makes sense, then bringing it into life. Could you do more than 3 blocks of 90 minutes?
You can. It's just that, the dedication, the amount of focus you will be able to give your practice at that time will not be at the same level, because your mind fatigues, right? With the amount of decisions that you're taking, the amount of time that you're using it on a daily basis, typically it trickles down. So towards the end of the day, yes, you can plug something in, but the question is, how much are you going to get out of that, right? It is more for your ego in that moment that you feel, well, I also worked on that topic, but what is really the return? That's why I would say you have those blocks and you can stretch it to a maximum of 90 minutes, but you're not able to magically make more of that. You can, if you have, let's say, an exam coming up, right? You would realize that, suddenly I have a newfound productivity. What you would realize is you're basically optimizing it for that day. But the days afterwards, you're lucky if you have one time 90 minutes. So, you can optimize it for a short period of time, but that then comes at the expense. So if you're looking at it from a peak performance, sustained peak performance, being able to deliver on an ongoing basis, it would 3 times 90 minutes would be the sweet spot.
You mentioned this family member that was just consumed by work all of the time. Didn't have any, and you thought, oh God, I never want to own my own business because if it's going to consume me like that, I'm going to have no time for enjoyment. You are now an entrepreneur. You have this business that's incredibly successful. Is it consuming you, or is having the directed mind allowing you to stay really focused at work and giving you more joy and more time outside of work?
The answer is yes.
Sorry, I've almost answered your own question for you.
No, the answer is yes.
But so can you just tell me like a little bit more about kind of the positive impact of how you've managed to create that balance? Because this balance is something that we're all looking for.
Yeah. Have I become that person? In many ways, yes. Because once you become so passionate, and it is something that that you can talk to. I'm one of those people that you meet at a party, and they ask you, okay, which field are you in? And it's like, health and fitness, and they would start asking me questions, and I would continue the conversation. Right? I think there's 2 types of people. One is like saying that they just cut that conversation off, and the other person continues. I'm one of those ones. I can talk to you. You wake me up in the middle of the night, and I'm okay to speak about it. So I think in many ways, yes, it has changed. Life has changed. Life for my wife and myself, because we're partners in life and business. So yes, that definitely has made a difference. In terms of the way I look at life, the way I experience it on a daily basis changed. I actually experience a whole lot more joy, fulfillment on a daily basis than I used to in the past. I basically derived joy out of things that did not really matter that much to me rather than other people, right? It was, let's say, going on certain vacations, but, going on certain trips, but that was usually for other people. It was not really, for myself. Right now, that somehow has changed. So, I find the level of satisfaction that I'm getting is much, much deeper. In terms of directed mind, it really helped me narrow down what are the things that move the needle for the business. Because at some point, with close to 100 people now, being present in Singapore, in the UAE, working across time zones, you're not able to, attend to everything, and you're not able to give attention to everything, every single thing in the same way that it is maybe possible at the beginning. So once your business goes from, let's say, a small, family stage to a tribe, to a village, right? We're not at a country stage or a city stage, right? But, those are the different kind of stages. Your role changes. And, the expectations that people have of you change as well. The directed mind actually helps you in that moment recognize, now we've grown to a certain level where all of those things are not possible anymore. And I can see that I am the system right now. When I'm the system, it can work for a certain period of time, but it will break. All right. Everything that is, purely regulated by, humans, how many there are, if there's no system in place, at some point it will fail, right? So you'd want to make sure that you're able to, build then structures, tools, processes that are able to assist at that stage to ensure that everybody that's involved actually has a good work environment, and you as a person can then focus again on the topics that matter. So it's that 80-20 rule, applied just in a different way. There's a nice book called 10x is easier than 2x. It basically means the key message is, if you want to grow 10 times in comparison to your current size, it is much easier than doing that if you're just aiming for 2 times the size. Is that the path of aiming for, just growing incrementally is a very busy one. The path where you basically want to look at how can I grow massively is a very, very lonely and, solitary one. So in terms of thinking about it from a business point of view, how do you apply the directed mind? It is basically looking at what is it for the team that will actually make a difference, right? What is the role that I should have? What are the 80% that I'm doing right now? What are the 20% that actually make a difference? So from a directed mind point of view, at regular intervals, I would review what are the 80% that I spend my time on that, consume a lot of my time. What are the 20% that really make a difference?
Yeah.
And I would basically say those 80% somebody else has to do over time. So I would then try to work with a team on identifying people that are the right fit to actually take care of those topics, not because they're not important, but they can be done by somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And that then in turn gives me back the time to turn those 20% into my new 80%. So from a directed mind point of view, at that moment, you ask me, what does it give you? What's the return? Do I have more time? Yes, that is an outcome. You spend more time on the things you should be spending time on. You feel more fulfilled because you feel that you're working on the right things. And in turn, it gives you not only time back, but it gives you mind space, presence back at the time that you have won. So what does that mean? You're basically just getting time back. You can have a very long day and you come back home 15 minutes earlier because you took a shortcut, but you can still be exhausted and not be available for anybody, right? You can have spent time working on the right things. And then because of that, having more time and being actually available for the people that you want to be available for. So I think rather than pure time, it actually gives you back presence that you can then spend time on things that matter to you.
So much from this episode, and I kind of want to go back to that kind of original question as to why I'm not getting results, or why maybe our listeners feel like they're not getting results. And the answer, I think it sounds like, is this directed mind, and being able to kind of cut through the noise, being able to remove things that aren't important, being able to focus, having tools in your toolbox to be able to help you refocus the mind, stay on track. So whether that's, during a marathon or running a race, or whether that's in business. And the output of that is that you are going to feel maybe less fragmented, less busy, more things are going to be a lot clearer. You'll probably feel a lot less stressed, like things are in a little bit more control.
Correct.
And really it's leveraging kind of data, looking at those, looking at what's going on, making decisions, making a plan, sticking to it, but being prepared to pivot if it's not working. And so it's still kind of having that self-awareness to be able to poke your head out of the trenches and being able to say, okay, we need to maybe refocus here and here. But there's so many insights in here, Bernhard. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Is there anything else that before we finish, that you would like to build on or that you'd like to share?
No, just wanted to share that, I think the experience that you had with me working as a PT, we've basically brought that to a different kind of level. I think at the time that we worked together, you had questions with regards to diet. You're very interested about all the stats, all the progress tracking. And we feel that, personal training has actually changed a lot. In the past, it was enough to just, deliver a session and then you leave, right? That's it. By now, when people work with a personal trainer, they expect that person to be knowledgeable with regards to training. I mean, that's a given. They want that person to be understanding of injuries. They want that person to be able to read a medical report. They want that person to understand biomarkers. That person needs to know nutrition, should have an understanding of sleep, should ideally have an understanding of the difference between training and coaching. Should have ideally an approach with regards to positive psychology, should be able to, change your life around in other ways as well. So what I want to say is the field has become very broad. And, based on our experience, it is too broad for just one person to take care of it. So that's why in terms of the model that we have, we basically, match our clients with a team of health professionals. So you would get a fitness trainer that is passionate and knowledgeable about fitness. They know fitness. They don't sell. They don't give nutrition advice. They really focus on fitness because that's what they know best. Second person they would work with is a clinical dietitian. because that person has a deep enough understanding, is able to, really go into the last, kind of details from a diet point of view. And that really makes a difference. So from a nutrition point of view, we have 3 different levels. You have a nutritionist, which is any person that is passionate about nutrition. My mom is a nutritionist. She has read, I don't know how many cookbooks, and, she really knows her stuff, but she has no formal education. You then have a nutrition coach. That is the next level. And then the highest one is a clinical dietitian, so somebody that really has studied it and has a formal understanding. Third and last person is what we call an accountability coach. So that person tracks progress and is really focused on, ensuring that the client sees results. So that person works with the 2 technical specialists and is then able to, give a very different level of advice. And, we've launched that concept in the UAE. So we're present in Singapore. I've been voted the #1 company for the convenience-based aspect for the past 4 years. And excited. Have had a strong start in the UAE, in Dubai. So anybody that is listening would like to know more about that, happy to have a conversation.
We'll link everything below. And I think you're right. It's, people are looking for holistic health and fitness, and the reality is training alone doesn't do it.
It doesn't.
You do have to be looking at your sleep, your supplements, your nutrition, and everything that kind of your recovery, everything that we've discussed. Yes. So I think what you're doing is awesome. And honestly, I'm so proud of what you've done. 4 years ago, it was just the start, and it's just been incredible to hear what you've achieved. And it's all down to that directed mindset. It's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it comes down to a fantastic team, honestly. It's people usually, congratulate me, but, I always say my wife, she's the person that actually deserves most of the credit.
I love that.
So, yeah.
And I wish you all the success. I hope it keeps going.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure it will. Yeah. Thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode and the conversation with Bernhard. We will link to all of Athleaders links below. Please feel free to connect. Definitely comment, and we'll both kind of respond to any of those messages that come through. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Bye.